In the ruthless landscape of The Young and the Restless, the pursuit of justice had long ceased to be clean, but for Christine Blair, it had now become something far more dangerous personal. The case against Phyllis Summers was no longer just about the law. It had evolved into a battle of control, reputation, and buried resentment that refused to stay buried. Every failed attempt to corner Phyllis only deepened Christine's frustration, turning her sense of duty into a sharp-edged obsession. The line between prosecutor and adversary blurred until it was no longer clear whether she was seeking justice or revenge. Christine understood something others refused to admit. Truth alone would not win this fight. Phyllis had survived too much, manipulated too many situations, and left behind too many fractured loyalties for a straightforward case to succeed. What was needed was leverage something powerful enough to force the truth into existence, even if it had to be reshaped in the process. That realization did not come without consequence. It demanded a compromise, not of strategy, but of principle, and once Christine crossed that internal threshold, there was no returning to who she had been before. Her attention turned toward Kane Ashby and Billy Abbott, two men who existed in the gray space between guilt and survival. Both carried histories that could be weaponized, both had reputations already fractured by past decisions, and both stood to lose everything if the right pressure was applied. Christine did not need them to be innocent, she needed them to be vulnerable. And vulnerability, she knew, was far easier to control than integrity. Kane's life had already been reduced to a delicate balance between redemption and exposure. Every step he had taken to rebuild himself was anchored in secrets that could collapse his progress in an instant. The weight of his past mistakes followed him relentlessly, shaping every decision, every relationship, every fragile attempt at stability. When the pressure began to mount, it did not feel sudden. It felt inevitable. The offer presented to him was not simply about money, it was about erasure, the possibility of wiping away the stains that defined him, of rewriting a narrative that had already cost him too much. But that promise came at a price he could not ignore. To accept meant participating in something fundamentally dishonest, reinforcing a system where truth could be bent to serve power. To refuse meant risking exposure, losing everything he had fought to reclaim, and proving that redemption, for someone like him, was always conditional. Billy's conflict was different, but no less destructive. Where Kane was driven by fear of losing stability, Billy was haunted by the constant threat of self-destruction. His life had always existed on the edge, balanced precariously between control and chaos. The offer placed in front of him did not just exploit his weaknesses, it amplified them. It presented an opportunity to regain influence, to reclaim a sense of dominance he had long associated with survival. But it also forced him to confront the reality that his choices had consequences not just for himself, but for everyone entangled in his life. Accepting the offer meant embracing a version of himself he had tried and repeatedly failed to leave behind. Refusing it meant risking irrelevance, losing the fragile grip he had on a world that never truly trusted him. Christine watched their internal struggles with calculated precision. She did not need immediate answers. She needed them to feel the weight of the decision, to understand that there was no outcome that did not involve loss. The brilliance of her strategy lay not in the offer itself, but in its inevitability. It was constructed in such a way that resistance would only deepen their vulnerability, drawing them further into a position where acceptance felt like the only rational choice. She had effectively turned their own fears against them, transforming personal weakness into leverage. Meanwhile, the shadow of Phyllis loomed over everything. Though she was not present in those moments of negotiation, her influence was undeniable. She had built a life on manipulation, on understanding how far people could be pushed before they broke, and now that same understanding was being used against her. But Phyllis was not the kind of person to remain passive in the face of threat. Even without direct knowledge of the deal being orchestrated, she could sense the shift in the air, the subtle changes in behavior, the growing tension that signaled something was moving against her. Her instincts, sharpened by years of survival, refused to let her ignore it. Suspicion turned quickly into paranoia, and paranoia into action. She began to retrace her steps, to identify potential weaknesses, to anticipate where the next attack might come from. But the more she searched, the more fragmented the situation became. The absence of clear evidence did not bring relief, it intensified her anxiety, forcing her to consider possibilities that felt increasingly out of control. As the pressure built, the emotional landscape around all of them began to fracture. Kane's hesitation turned into resentment, directed not just at Christine, but at the circumstances that had made him susceptible to her influence. Billy's internal conflict escalated into self-destructive impulses, his inability to reconcile his past with his present pushing him closer to decisions that prioritized immediate gain over long-term consequence. Christine, despite her outward control, found herself increasingly consumed by the very tactics she had chosen to employ, her sense of justification eroding under the weight of what she was becoming. The situation reached a point where neutrality was no longer possible. Every choice carried irreversible consequences, and the illusion of control began to collapse. Kane and Billy were no longer simply deciding whether to accept an offer. They were deciding who they were willing to become. Christine was no longer just pursuing a case. She was redefining the boundaries of her own morality. And Phyllis, whether she realized it fully or not, was being drawn into a confrontation that would force her to face the cumulative impact of every decision she had ever made. In the end, the true conflict was not external. It was internal, rooted in the clash between survival and integrity, between the desire for control and the cost of achieving it. Each character stood on the edge of a decision that would not just alter the outcome of a case, but reshape their identity in ways that could not be undone. The tension did not come from what would happen next, but from the understanding that whatever happened, it would not leave any of them unchanged. And as the fragile balance finally began to break, it became clear that this was never just about bringing someone down. It was about how far each of them was willing to fall to make it happen. The climax does not arrive with a loud explosion, but with the silent collapse of every final boundary in the world of the young and the restless. Just when everything seems settled, the truth is twisted in the most ruthless way. Kane Ashby and Billy Abbott ultimately make their choice not because they believe it is right, but because they see no other way out. Yet the price they pay does not end with betraying others, it is the betrayal of themselves, as they realize that everything they sacrificed brings no salvation as promised. Christine Blair gets what she wants, but her victory feels disturbingly hollow. In the very moment she believes she has secured justice, she is forced to confront a devastating truth. She has become exactly what she once despised, someone willing to manipulate, buy loyalty, and shatter moral boundaries to win. Meanwhile, Phyllis Summers, when pushed to the edge, does not break as expected. Instead, a darker truth emerges, one final move no one anticipated, turning the entire scheme upside down and revealing that everyone has merely been a piece in a far greater game. As secrets unravel, no one remains in a position of safety. Trust is shattered, relationships become irreparable, and every wrong decision begins to circle back with destructive force. The most shocking truth is not who wins or loses, but that everyone has lost something far more important themselves. And in the final moment, when everything is finally exposed, the only question left is not who is to blame, but whether anyone is strong enough to live with the consequences of what they have done. And in the final moment, when everything is finally exposed, the only question left is not